The introduction. The Westbrook Foundation's annual charity gala glittered with the presence of Seattle's elite. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden hue over the ballroom of the Grand Palace Hotel, where waiters in pristine uniforms weaved between guests carrying flutes of champagne on silver trays. Franklin Mercer, the 58-year-old CEO of Meridian Pharmaceuticals, adjusted his bow tie as he surveyed the room with the confidence of a man accustomed to commanding attention. His salt-and-pepper hair was perfectly styled, his custom tuxedo impeccably tailored to his tall frame. At his side stood a woman who was decidedly not his wife of 30 years. "Thomas, just the man I wanted to see," Franklin called out, waving over his business partner and oldest friend. "I'd like you to meet Veronica Reed, our new business consultant for the Asian market's expansion." Thomas Bennett raised an eyebrow slightly as he shook the hand of the striking woman who couldn't be older than 35. Her emerald dress hugged her figure in a way that suggested she hadn't been hired solely for her business acumen. "Pleasure to meet you, Ms. Reed. I wasn't aware we were bringing on new consultants for the Asia project," Thomas said, his voice measured but curious. Veronica smiled, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. The opportunity arose rather suddenly. "Franklin has been wonderfully supportive of my innovative approach to market penetration strategies." Across the room, Diane Mercer watched the interaction with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. After 3 decades of marriage to one of Seattle's most powerful men, she had developed an intuition for trouble. She smoothed her silver gown and made her way toward the small group, greeting several board members along the way. "Darling, there you are," she said, sliding her arm through Franklin's with practiced ease. "And this must be the consultant you mentioned." Franklin's smile faltered for just a moment. "Yes, Diane, this is Veronica Reed. She'll be working closely with me on the Singapore office launch." "How fascinating," Diane replied, her voice honey-sweet. "I'd love to hear all about your qualifications over dinner sometime." Penelope Wright, the director of the Westbrook Foundation, approached with relief evident on her face. "Franklin, Diane, thank you both for your continued support. Your donation this year will fund our entire pediatric cancer research initiative." As Penelope drew Franklin into a conversation about the foundation's work, Diane maintained her composure while studying Veronica. There was something calculated in the younger woman's demeanor that set off warning bells. Meanwhile, at the entrance, Franklin's son Gregory arrived with his girlfriend Olivia Chen. At 32, Gregory had followed in his father's footsteps, working his way up in Meridian's research division, rather than accepting nepotistic advancement. "There's Dad," Gregory said, nodding toward the group, "and looks like he's brought a colleague." Olivia squeezed his hand. "Your mother doesn't look pleased." "Mom's a master of social chess. If she's upset, she won't show it here," Gregory replied as they moved toward the bar, "though I haven't heard about any new consultants for the Asia project." As the evening progressed, Franklin kept Veronica close, introducing her to investors and board members with unmistakable pride. Thomas pulled Diane aside during a lull in the festivities. "How are you holding up?" he asked quietly. Diane's perfect facade cracked slightly. "This isn't the first time, Thomas, but bringing her here to our charity." She straightened her shoulders. "I need to make some calls tomorrow. I believe Ms. Reed may not be exactly who she claims to be." Thomas glanced toward Franklin, who was laughing too loudly at something Veronica had whispered in his ear. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking it's time to do some digging," Diane replied, her voice hardening with resolve. "Franklin has always been careless with his indiscretions, but this one feels different, more calculated." As the evening drew to a close, no one noticed Veronica discreetly photographing documents left carelessly on a table near Franklin's coat. The Whispers. The sleek glass headquarters of Meridian Pharmaceuticals buzzed with activity, but beneath the professional veneer, whispers traveled through cubicles and conference rooms. Janet Parker, Franklin's executive assistant for 15 years, intercepted another delivery of roses intended for Veronica Reed's temporary office. "Third bouquet this week," muttered Janet, redirecting the delivery person to the building's far wing. She'd been running interference since the charity gala 2 weeks ago, trying to minimize the visible evidence of Franklin's infatuation. In the executive break room, 2 managers fell silent as Janet entered. She pretended not to notice, but their hushed conversation about the boss's midlife crisis hadn't escaped her. Thomas Bennett closed his office door after calling Franklin in for a private meeting. "This has to stop, Frank. The board is talking. Employees are distracted. And bringing Veronica to the Johnston meeting yesterday was inappropriate." Franklin leaned back in his chair, irritation flashing across his face. "She's providing valuable insights, Thomas. Her experience with international pharmaceutical regulations is exactly what we need for the Singapore expansion. Her resume appeared overnight, and suddenly she has a corner office," Thomas countered. "Have you verified her credentials? Because I called Stanford and they have no record of her MBA." "That's a clerical error," Franklin dismissed with a wave. "I've seen her work. She's brilliant." Across town, Diane Mercer sat in her sister Rachel's sunlit kitchen, staring into a cup of tea. "He's not even trying to hide it this time," Diane said, her composure finally cracking in the privacy of her sister's home. 28 years of marriage and he parades her around like a trophy." Rachel reached across the table, squeezing Diane's hand. "What do you know about her?" "Not enough," Diane admitted. "But I hired someone to find out. Veronica Reed appeared in Seattle just 3 months ago. Before that, there's almost no digital footprint. That's suspicious for anyone these days, let alone a supposed international business consultant," Rachel noted. Diane's phone buzzed with an email notification. The investigator found something. Veronica Reed looks remarkably similar to a Victoria Redmond who worked for Westfield Pharmaceuticals until last year. "Westfield? Our biggest competitor?" Rachel's eyes widened. This isn't just about an affair anymore." At Meridian's research campus, Gregory Mercer overheard colleagues discussing his father while he was collecting samples from the lab refrigerator. "I hear she's been given access to the Singapore project files," one researcher whispered, "without proper clearance protocols." Gregory froze, his hand still on the refrigerator door. His father had always kept business and pleasure separate, despite previous indiscretions. Giving an unvetted consultant access to proprietary research was uncharacteristically careless. Later that afternoon, Penelope Wright from the Westbrook Foundation called an emergency meeting with her board of directors. "Franklin Mercer's personal situation is creating negative attention," she explained. "Several donors have expressed concerns about his continued role as our fundraising chair." Harrison Wells, a senior board member, sighed. "The Mercers have been our biggest supporters for a decade. Can we afford to distance ourselves from them?" "Not from them," Penelope clarified. "Just from Franklin and only temporarily. I spoke with Diane yesterday. She's as committed as ever to our cause." That evening, Janet stayed late, troubled by an exchange she'd witnessed. She'd seen Veronica copying files from Franklin's computer while he was at a budget meeting. When confronted, Veronica had laughed it off as helping organize his presentation materials. Janet picked up her phone and hesitated before dialing Diane's private number. Her loyalty to Franklin ran deep, but her concern for the company he'd built was stronger. "Mrs. Mercer? It's Janet. There's something you should know about Ms. Reed." As darkness fell over Seattle, the whispers grew louder, spreading beyond Meridian's walls to board members' homes, investors' ears, and eventually, to the offices of Westfield Pharmaceuticals, where a senior executive smiled at an encrypted message from their most valuable asset. The confrontation. The quarterly board meeting of Meridian Pharmaceuticals was scheduled for 9 a.m., but by 8:30, the tension in the boardroom was already palpable. Board members arrived early, exchanging significant glances as they helped themselves to coffee. Franklin Mercer strode in confidently with Veronica Reed at his side, her tablet clutched to her chest and a satisfied smile playing on her lips. "Good morning, everyone," Franklin announced. "Before we begin, I'd like to introduce Veronica Reed, who will be joining us today as our strategic advisor for the Singapore expansion. Her insights have been invaluable these past weeks." Harrison Wells, the most senior board member, frowned. "Franklin, non-board members typically don't attend these meetings without prior approval." "I'm approving it now," Franklin replied dismissively. "Veronica has prepared an excellent presentation on the Asian market opportunities." The boardroom door opened again, and Diane Mercer entered, elegant in a navy business suit. Behind her followed Thomas Bennett and Janet Parker. Franklin's face darkened. "Diane, this is highly inappropriate. You can't just walk into a board meeting." "Actually, she can," Thomas interjected. "As a major shareholder and founding partner of Meridian, Diane has every right to be here." Diane placed a leather portfolio on the table. I think the board will want to hear what I've discovered before Ms. Reed begins her presentation. Veronica's confident smile faltered slightly. Franklin, would you like to introduce your strategic advisor properly, or shall I? Diane asked, her voice steady. This is ridiculous, Franklin sputtered. Veronica is a highly qualified consultant who is actually Victoria Redmond, Diane finished, opening her portfolio and distributing documents to each board member. Former employee of Westfield Pharmaceuticals, specializing in corporate intelligence. The room fell silent as the board members examined the evidence, photographs, employment records, and a comprehensive background report. Harrison Wells adjusted his glasses. These documents show Ms. Reed, or Ms. Redmond, has used at least 3 different identities in the past 5 years, each time infiltrating pharmaceutical companies just before major product launches. Veronica's posture stiffened. These accusations are absurd. Franklin, tell them. But Franklin was staring at the documents, the color draining from his face as he recognized the pattern of corporate espionage laid out before him. Dr. Winston James, Franklin's mentor and senior board member, shook his head sadly. Franklin, how could you bring her into our confidence without a proper background check? The Singapore formulation, our breakthrough cancer treatment, it's all compromised. He was too busy being flattered by a pretty face, came a voice from the doorway. Gregory Mercer entered, his expression grim. I found unauthorized access logs to the research database. Someone's been downloading proprietary formulations using Father's credentials. Veronica suddenly grabbed her tablet and made for the door, but Janet blocked her path. Security is already on their way, Janet said firmly. And IT has locked down all systems. Franklin finally found his voice. Veronica, tell them this is a mistake, tell them. Veronica's demeanor transformed, her affected warmth replaced by cold efficiency. You made it so easy, Franklin. A few compliments, some late-night strategy sessions, and you handed me everything Westfield needed. Your security protocols are almost as weak as your marriage. That's enough, Thomas intervened. Security will escort Ms. Redmond to a holding room until the authorities arrive. As security personnel led Veronica away, Franklin turned to Diane, humiliation and anger warring on his face. How long have you known? Long enough to protect some of our intellectual property, Diane replied, though not nearly soon enough to spare you from your own foolishness. The board erupted in concerned discussion. Gregory approached his mother, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder before addressing the room. I stand with my mother and with Meridian's integrity. My father's lapse in judgment shouldn't destroy what we've all built together. Franklin, isolated at the head of the table, watched as his son publicly chose sides, another consequence of his recklessness he hadn't foreseen. The fallout rain pelted against the windows of Meridian Pharmaceuticals as Franklin Mercer cleared his desk, placing personal items into a cardboard box. The board had voted unanimously for his temporary removal as CEO, pending a full investigation. Thomas Bennett would serve as interim leader, while the company assessed the damage. Security footage revealed Veronica, now identified as Victoria Redmond, had accessed secure servers at least 12 times over the past month. She had disappeared during transport to police headquarters, likely with help from her Westfield handlers. Franklin's phone buzzed with a notification. Another headline about the scandal. Pharmaceutical CEO duped by corporate spy. He switched it off, unable to face more public humiliation. A knock at the door announced Thomas's arrival. Cars waiting downstairs. Back exit to avoid the reporters. How bad is it? Franklin asked, his voice hollow. The Singapore project is compromised. We've recalled all digital documents and changed security protocols, Thomas reported. But the PR damage is substantial. Stock's down 18% since the news broke. Franklin nodded grimly. And Diane? Filed for divorce this morning. Her attorney delivered the papers to reception an hour ago. Thomas hesitated. Frank, she protected the company despite everything. She had IT create a shadow server with modified formulations after she suspected Veronica. What Westfield stole is useless. Close enough to seem legitimate, but with critical components altered. Across town, Diane sat in her attorney's office, signing documents that would end nearly 3 decades of marriage. We'll need to inventory all assets, her lawyer explained. As a founding partner in Meridian, your stake remains secure regardless of the divorce. I don't want his destruction, Diane clarified. Just my freedom. Ensure the settlement protects Gregory's inheritance and the company's stability. Later that afternoon, Gregory met his father at a quiet restaurant far from Meridian's offices. "You should be at work," Franklin said as his son slid into the booth across from him. "Janet found something you should see," Gregory replied, sliding a tablet across the table. "Emails between Veronica and someone at Westfield. They specifically targeted you, Dad. They researched your preferences, your history, even your favorite wine. She was trained to become exactly what would appeal to you." Franklin scrolled through the evidence, his shame deepening. "That doesn't excuse my behavior." "No, it doesn't," Gregory agreed. "But it means you weren't the only one being manipulated. Westfield exploited your weakness, but they engineered the situation." At Meridian headquarters, Janet worked late, combing through company records with a security team. She discovered that Veronica had attempted to access files related to several projects beyond the Singapore expansion, suggesting Westfield's espionage ambitions were broader than initially believed. "We need to check every project she might have touched," Janet instructed the team. "And compare access logs with Franklin's calendar to identify any patterns." Meanwhile, Penelope Wright from the Westbrook Foundation called Diane with an unexpected proposal. "Our board values your integrity, Diane. The way you handled this situation protected both Meridian and the Foundation from greater scandal. We'd like you to consider joining us as a director of corporate partnerships." Diane was momentarily speechless. For years, she had sublimated her own career ambitions to support Franklin's. Now, ironically, his downfall had created an opening for her own professional renaissance. At his temporary apartment, Franklin received an unexpected visit from Dr. Winston James, his longtime mentor. "I've known you for 30 years, Dr. Winston said, settling into an armchair. "You've made a terrible mistake, but your legacy shouldn't end this way." "The board won't reinstate me," Franklin said bitterly. "Not immediately," Dr. Winston agreed. "But redemption is possible if you're willing to work for it. Start by cooperating fully with authorities to bring Westfield's espionage network to justice." As rain continued to fall over Seattle, the scattered players in Franklin's downfall each faced their new reality, some rising from the ashes of his mistakes, others plotting their next moves in the corporate chess game, and Franklin himself confronting the true cost of his golden deception. The redemption. 6 months passed, bringing Seattle's spring and tentative new beginnings. Cherry blossoms framed the view from Thomas Bennett's office, formerly Franklin's, where both men now sat reviewing quarterly reports. "The FDA has fast-tracked the revised Singapore formulation," Thomas noted. "Diane's altered decoy bought us the time we needed to develop a superior version." Franklin nodded, the lines in his face deeper than 6 months earlier. "And Westfield's stock has plummeted since the industrial espionage charges." Victoria Redmond had eventually been apprehended in Vancouver, attempting to cross into Canada with multiple false identities. Her subsequent cooperation with federal investigators had implicated several Westfield executives in a systematic corporate espionage operation, targeting multiple pharmaceutical companies. "The board meets next week to discuss your return," Thomas said, closing the folder. "Not as CEO, not yet, but as head of research. Your expertise is still valuable, Frank, even if your judgment was compromised." Franklin accepted this with humility that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. "I appreciate the opportunity, and I understand the conditions." Those conditions included ethics training, reduced authority, and regular accountability meetings. The corporate titan had been humbled, but in that humbling had found an unexpected clarity. Across town, Diane Mercer, who had reclaimed her maiden name, Diane Lawrence, welcomed potential donors to the Westbrook Foundation's new research facility. As Director of Corporate Partnerships, she had already secured funding that exceeded the Foundation's annual target. "Your experience at Meridian has been invaluable," Penelope commented as they toured the labs. "You understand both the science and the business aspects of our partnerships," Diane smiled. "I spent years observing from the sidelines. It's gratifying to finally apply that knowledge directly." After the tour, Diane met Dr. Winston James for dinner, their third date in recent weeks. At 62, Winston possessed the intellectual brilliance that had always attracted Diane, coupled with an emotional maturity Franklin had never achieved. "Gregory called today," Diane mentioned over dessert. He and Olivia have set a wedding date for September. That's wonderful news, Winston replied warmly. How is he handling the idea of you attending with me and Franklin being there as well? Better than expected, Diane said. He's been surprisingly forgiving toward his father. I think discovering Victoria's calculated approach helped him understand, if not excuse, what happened. Gregory and Olivia's engagement party the following weekend brought together the fractured family in a tentative peace. Franklin arrived alone, bearing a gift and an appropriate humility. Congratulations, son, he said, embracing Gregory. Olivia, welcome to our complicated family. Gregory appreciated his father's self-awareness. Thanks for coming. Dad, there's someone from the hospital board I'd like you to meet. They're interested in Meridian's pediatric formulations. As Franklin followed his son to meet the hospital representative, he passed Diane and Winston. The three exchanged civil nods, not warm but no longer hostile. Later, as guests mingled on the rooftop venue overlooking Elliott Bay, Thomas approached Franklin with a champagne flute. A year ago, who would have predicted this scene? Thomas mused. You and Diane in the same room without lawyers present. Franklin watched as his ex-wife laughed at something Winston said. She deserves happiness. I didn't appreciate what I had until I destroyed it. Some things can't be rebuilt, Thomas acknowledged, but others can be transformed into something different, sometimes better. The evidence supported his optimism. Meridian had recovered under new leadership that emphasized ethical practices and collaborative research. The scandal had ultimately strengthened their security protocols and corporate governance. As sunset painted Seattle's skyline in gold, Franklin found himself momentarily alone at the railing. Gregory joined him, 2 glasses of scotch in hand. Olivia and I want you to know we value your presence in our lives, Gregory said, handing his father a glass. Not the man you were, but the man you're becoming. Franklin accepted both the drink and the conditional forgiveness it represented. I'm learning that second chances don't erase consequences. They just offer a different path forward. Across the rooftop, Janet approached Diane with news. Victoria Redmond's sentencing was announced. 5 years for industrial espionage and related charges. Several Westfield executives received longer terms. Diane nodded, satisfaction evident in her expression. Justice serves its purpose, but I'm more interested in what we build next than what they destroyed. As the engagement celebration continued into the evening, the fragments of Franklin's shattered empire had rearranged themselves into a new constellation. Not perfect, not unmarked by the past, but resilient in ways his former arrogance could never have anticipated. His golden deception had cost him dearly, but from its ashes something genuine had finally emerged.